Question of the day again, reiterating, is Rory McIlroy now an all-time top 10 player? Yes, no, or he will be, but not quite yet. 62% now are saying yes, he is officially in the top 10 all-time, no questions asked. 6% are saying no way. And 31% are saying he's going to be, he will be, but not quite yet. Andrew, why don't you put that graphic up there that you just did? This right here, Matt, is a list of all-time players that have 5 or more major championships, as well as 29 or more PGA Tour wins. And there you see the list with the majors next to the tour wins. And there are only 12 players on that list total, Matt.
Mm-hmm. Yep, that's a very, very good list. Here's my thing. Leaving that list up there just for a second, Andrew. Here's my take on it. There's no one on the list in front of Rory that I would substitute out Rory for, where he's now 12th in that list. I would add to that list Bobby Jones. Now, Bobby Jones is going to be credited with that list based upon so-called professionals in these majors with 7. He actually won 13 because the amateur, the U.S. amateur, and the amateur in Great Britain were considered majors at that time. Now, you could rear up and go, wait a minute, if we're going to do that, then you got to add the Western Open, et cetera. There's arguments that can be made for the Australian Open, et cetera. However, even in their day, while those were looked upon as incredibly important tournaments, they were not given the same stature of the British Amateur, the U.S. Amateur, the U.S. Open, the PGA, or what became the Augusta National Invitational, later named the Masters. So when I look at that, the first thing that I see is Rory's position in there. Thus, that would drop Rory down to 13th on that list. The reason why, what my definition of the all-time top 10, while I think the career Grand Slam is an absolutely remarkable achievement. Believe me, it's an absolutely remarkable achievement. Rory has 5 major championships and he's won 29 times on the PGA Tour. And we're using this as the standard of comparison here, right? You could go to it and go, well, you have to add in the because when you count DP World Tour, formerly known as European Tour wins, many of them are overlapping. You'd have to net it down to what that number actually is, et cetera. But with all of these players on this list, they all have wins in other ways in other tours. So unless you have the minimum number of major championships won and wins, then you don't move up the list in my mind. While those 4 wins that represent the career Grand Slam are remarkable, every major is remarkable. And I would not put the career Grand Slam collectively of 4 above someone that's won, for example, 5 or 6 majors. That person that's won more majors still trumps the total number of which Rory has 5, in my humble view. So Lee Trevino, that you can see there with 6 and 29 wins, if Rory wins one more major, I would tie him with Lee Trevino. When you look at Walter Hagen with 11 and 45 tour wins, consider that Walter Hagen won those 11 before the Masters he was at the end of his career by the time the Masters started in 1934. So the fact that he won that many majors beforehand is remarkable. I will hear the argument, and I can hear people making it right now, where it's a recency bias, where they'll go, well, the fields weren't as deep or the fields weren't as difficult. You play against who you play against at the time. And just go back and read Bobby Jones' writing and read his books and hear the pressure and the stress that he went through to try to win the majors that he won during the course of his career. And you realize that this was no walk in the park for them. This was not them rolling over the fields. The fields may not have been as deep, but they were fierce at the top. And that was the case with Jack Nicklaus as well, if you look at the Hall of Famers that he was competing against at the time. So in my mind, Rory McIlroy is really, really close. And I would be of that last question that you asked, the last option that you gave, Dom, which is say he's close, but he's not quite there yet. Whether it will happen or not, I believe that it will, which is another discussion altogether. I'll pause for a second, Dom, if you want to weigh in with anything that you're hearing from anybody yet, or any comments that you want to make relative to what we're talking about here.
Sure, I'll read some stuff coming in. Let's see. We've got Bob says, incredible Masters, that it was.
Yeah.
Blake says, I fell out of my seat on that missed putt in regulation on 18. Really good for Rory to finish it off in overtime. Kevin says, great Masters. I was pulling for Rosie. If Rosie won, he would have qualified for the Hall of Fame. I think he's already in the Hall of Fame. I mean, between his European Tour wins and PGA Tour wins and the fact that he won a gold medal, I'd be shocked if he didn't get into the Hall of Fame. But yes, technically, I guess it would be a guarantee. Salty says, this year's Grand Slam is in jeopardy. I want to see Rory take it. Now we have someone getting in the mix, Matt, saying he could win all 4 majors this year with, I don't know, maybe this leaf has been turned over now. Maybe the floodgates open. Andrew, can you put up the rest of the majors this year, the schedule? Because obviously we've got Quail Hollow coming up, and we all know how much Rory loves Quail Hollow.
Yeah, Dom, this is actually where
paradise.
This is where I was going to go next with this whole thing. I paused just for a second to give you a chance to come in with some comments and where we stand on your current question of the day in terms of percentages. So let's pause on the majors that are coming up, and we'll go through that in some detail.
Sure. The update there, if he's all top 10, yes is 57% now. It's come down a little bit. You're swaying some folks, Matt. 17% say no. 26% say he will be, but not yet. So there you go. I mean, if I'm playing devil's advocate,
26% are saying will be.
Yeah, he will be, but not yet. Yeah. If I'm playing devil's advocate, you sort of partially answered the question, but if I'm trying to play the other side of this with Rory being in the top 10 right now, my question would be, how do you weigh the lack of strength of field to the strength of field today when you're comparing eras?
Well,
so
the
like
hard
if you
part
go
about
like
doing
when
that,
you were talking, I looked up like the 1926 U.S. Open that Bobby Jones won, and the bottom of that leaderboard. I mean, he's beating these people by 30 something shots. I mean, so the literally, I could read it again. So the gap is seismic between the top and the bottom at that time and place. How do you balance that in the discussion?
Yeah, it's always about a recency bias. And if I posed the same question and said, 1926 is next year 100 years ago. If we go forward 100 years from now in the game of golf, how would you feel who are sitting at home that are adamant that Tiger Woods is the greatest player in the history of the game? Or maybe you feel Jack Nicklaus is the greatest player in the history of the game. Well, how would you feel if I said, yeah, but in a century from now, are people going to look at that and go, please, the players of 100 years on are so much better than the players 100 years ago when Tiger was playing and Jack was playing. And 100 years on from now, Tiger and Jack are going to be pretty close to looking like they were in the same era. They're not going to be exactly, but it's going to be close. It's almost going to be like a Harry Vardon to old Tom Morris. If I asked you that, most people would be like, "Oh yeah. They kind of competed at the same time. Well, they were separated by this almost the exact same amount of time as Jack Nicklaus to Tiger Woods at the height of their prowess." And so, if I said that 100 years from now, people will scoff at Tiger Woods because of the depth of field and the way that people play golf at that time, would you think that was fair? So, what I do when I look at the majors is, what did the human being have to go through in order to achieve the accomplishment that they did? And it's funny that you mentioned Bob Jones, because he even writes in his books about the tremendous amount of weight that he lost, about how upset his stomach was, how he couldn't eat, et cetera, et cetera. And to that point, just give me 1 second. Rory was asked about the same in terms of how he was feeling, and the question from the journalist was relative to the first tee. McIlroy said, yeah, everything that you would think, the knot in your stomach. I haven't really eaten or had an appetite all day. I tried to force some food down. He said your legs feel a little jelly-like, and those are nerves, and they're natural, and they're all good things. But if you're feeling like that, I think that's more of a problem than when you do feel your legs. It's such a battle in your head trying to stay in the moment and hit this next shot and hit that next shot. It hit him good. It was that battle today. My battle today was with myself. It wasn't with anybody else. You know, at the end there, it was with Justin, but my battle today was with my mind in staying in the present. What I'm getting at with that is that quote from Rory is absolutely 100% consistent with the quotes from those who have accomplished great things in the game and winning these majors all the way back to when they did it. There is consistency with that. So now you're getting into the greater argument of saying, can you compare one era to another? Right? That's the universal argument in sport, in all sports across the board. And if one declares that no, you can't do that, then you have to have what you would call a list for today of the top 10. And if it was a list for today of the top 10, the way that a lot of people are defining it right now is they're declaring, it was in that article I read for you as well, that Rory McIlroy is the greatest player post Tiger Woods. And the definition of that was because Brooks Koepka also has 5 majors during that same run. And so people are going to look at that and go, well, yeah, okay, well, Rory has more overall wins, gross wins. But at the same time, I would look at that and go, wait a minute, Phil Mickelson won a major in 2021. That's definitely in the same era that we're talking about, isn't it? He has 6 of them. Andrew, go ahead and go back to that list, if you would, please, of major championships and tour wins and as a comparison. And there you see Phil Mickelson with 6 and 45. Which puts Phil Mickelson amongst the top 10. And before he won that last major and got to 6, I had him just outside the top 10. I no longer have him outside the top 10. So that's why I'm saying with Rory McIlroy, I get the current euphoria. And look, you guys know that I like Rory. I don't have any axe to grind against Rory. I actually disagree with the comment that you made earlier, Dom, that I know that there's people that are taking a us versus them on one side or the other. And you said there's not a lot of people in the middle. I believe the vast majority of people are in the middle. I actually think that a huge percentage are in the middle. And I think the people that are ardent on one extreme or the other are the vocal minority. I don't think that they represent the majority. So if you were talking about a modern list of the top 10, and then we could debate how you define that, I'd say, yeah, Rory's definitely in that. He's probably in the top 5, maybe even higher than that. If you defined it by this so-called post-Tiger, greatest players, that's a weird definition, but okay, is he the best amongst that? Yeah, I suppose you could say that because the majority of his 29 now wins have come since Tiger was at the height of his prowess. But remember, Tiger won the Masters in 2019. It wasn't really that long ago, too. So even that one's a strange one. So that brings us back to the same thing. When you're defining, and you had the question, is he at top 10 all time? The first thing, you can't go into it and go, well, I'm going to eliminate a third or half of the list because they didn't play at the same time that Rory played, or they didn't play at the same time that Tiger played. Some of them did. Some of them overlapped. And at what point do you say, no, it doesn't count anymore? And is that not a recency bias? For example, if you look at Gene Sarazen, who won his first major in the 1920s, and Walter Hagen, who's already talked about, okay, are those the guys that you're going to take out? Would you really have the gumption to take out Ben Hogan or Sam Snead? Would you take out Arnold Palmer in terms of what they accomplished? Because at the time that they were doing what they're doing, did their fields have the same depth as they have today? No, they didn't have the same depth.
Let me ask the question another way, Matt. Let me reframe the question really quickly.
Go ahead.
Would you say then the best way to phrase it would be, again, to put it simply, it's equally as hard to win the U.S. Open in 1910 as it is to win next year? That's just how hard it is to win the U.S. Open. Doesn't matter.
At the top of it, I would say.
No, I'm just saying the difficulty of winning the U.S. Open or the Masters, whatever, a major championship, is,
yes,
let's say on a scale of 1 to 10, right? It's a 10. That's how hard it is to win the Masters in 2050. That's how hard it is. Well,
if you talk about the Masters, it started in 1934, but yeah. The U.S. Open started in 1895. So
no, but that's my point, though. Is that a way to frame the discussion then? A better way to do it in terms of
you could frame it that way, and my answer to that would be yes. Although most people would reject that if someone said yes. It's as hard to win at any time a major championship as it is today, because they would go to depth of field. And they'd say, well, it's not as strong from top to bottom. My contention is when Jack Nicklaus was winning his majors, it's not as strong as top to bottom as it is today. But at the top, it is incredibly difficult to win.
Well,
Go
remember,
back and do
Brooks
your
said a couple
research, go
years
back
ago
and
at the
see.
Masters, Matt, that these tournaments only have 10 or 15 people in them anyway. He literally framed it that way.
Yeah, but Jack used to say
think it
that
was-
too. So that was what they would do. He and Jack said the same thing. It's funny because when Brooks said it, people somehow took offense to it in some quarters, and I was like, he said the same thing that Jack Nicklaus said. He would say that the percentages vary in terms of the quotes and over time, but that the vast majority of people defeat themselves before they even get there. They're upset about the golf course setup. A lot of the comments come out of like U.S. Open setups and things. They're upset about the setup. They're upset about the tee times that they got, et cetera. You just heard the quote that I read to you from the transcript from Rory that's saying his greatest competitor today was himself. And that's where I go to your question when you said in 1910, in 1934, in 1950 at Marion, in 1953 at Carnoustie, obviously I'm mentioning Ben Hogan with those. Was it as hard for a player mentally to overcome the nerves, to overcome the doubt, to overcome the field, to overcome all of the outside variables, all of them, whatever they are? Was it as hard for a player emotionally to do what they needed to do at that time as it is today? And my answer would be absolutely yes. And if we don't answer that way, then we are what I call engaging in a present day conceit. This idea that somehow what we do here and now has more significance, or it's more difficult, or it's more profound than it was at the time that someone else did it. To which I would ask you the same question. Then are you willing to concede that in 100 years from now, people should scoff and laugh and brush off the table the accomplishments of those that surround you today? Right? That's where people usually would sit back and take an offense and go, oh, what are you talking about? It's outrageous. We've got great depth today. How can 100 years from now be different than where we are right now? That's the people from 100 years ago. Right? So anyway, that's my feeling on it.